Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon, how are you doing?
I'm all right, James. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. We have with us a guest today. We have got Frank Devine with us. Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, boys.
Hi, Frank.
Hello, Jimmy.
I'm not sure how best to introduce Frank, so how would you introduce yourself, Frank? Probably better if you do it. You'll do a much better job.
I don't really ever introduce myself, James. I let what I say introduce me. I don't like kind of adverts at the beginning.
So it'll be like a magical mystery tour, and people can make up their own.
That's good. Is this guy talking rubbish, or is it worth listening to him? That's the intrigue we want to create.
Well, from what little I already know, Frank, you are definitely worth listening to. So we'll keep the intrigue going a little bit longer. What have you been up to, though, James?
Well, it's been a big week in the Lawther household.
Yes,
My 22-year-old daughter in final year at university has got a job. Woo,
Wow.
woo. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah. So as of the 1st of September, she will be off my hands. So there you go. It's quite
No, don't you believe it for a minute?
Yeah,
No, she's coming back. Is that what you're telling me? Yeah.
they're never off your hands. It just it's just a different payment method. Trust me.
The financial liability has decreased. So that's quite exciting.
Well, congratulations. The big news in my household is that we secured our tickets for the FA Cup semi-final at Wembley. So everyone is happy. We have got seats near the halfway line. We're overjoyed. Looking forward to that.
Okay. Anyone interesting playing? Or
Oh, Jesus, man. I can't even talk to you about it, James. Forest are playing Man City in the FA Cup semi-final. Jeez, it's the most important game of the season.
Very good. Unless, of course, you get through, and then it'll be irrelevant, won't it?
Yeah, it'll be the second most important game when we get to the final. When we get to the final.
Something to look forward to.
Yes.
Right then, let's move on before I get any football abuse.
Well, today we'll keep the intrigue going a little bit longer, but Frank is going to help us understand a little bit more about how you can really unlock the potential of people. Frank is a guru on all things leadership development. So, Frank, what got you into leadership development?
Well, when I was leaving university, I was looking for organisations that took leadership development seriously. And back then, in the very early 80s, the top three, according to our careers advice, were Shell, BP, and Unilever. So I applied for them, and I got a job with two of them. And so what I got exposed to was what was regarded at the time as the leading organisation in terms of developing their leaders. And we were exposed to what were regarded as the leading thought leaders at the time. We had people coming over from Harvard to teach us, etc., etc. And we had this kind of advanced, almost guaranteed promotion and development process whereby you might work for 6 months at maximum in one area, and then you were, no matter what was going on, you were moved to another one. Now, to give you a whole view of the organization, the corporate philosophy was that if you recruit the best graduates from the best universities and you expose them to the best thinkers and then you move them around the organization so their learning speed was maximized, from that group you would grow your future main board directors. That was the thinking. So we were a kind of a privileged group in both Shell and Unilever. I expected that the guys I was with, the people I was with, would be universally outstanding because this was a theory that they would be. And what I found was there were some outstanding leaders. And I know, James, you came through the Unilever
I did.
process.
One of the outstanding ones, clearly.
Oh, that was...
So I'd say that before you did,
cold
James.
water all over that theory if they gave me a job.
No, don't say that. But I came across also some of the most narcissistic and the worst human beings I've ever worked with as well. So
I was interesting place, actually. There were some really great people, but there were some king-size egos to go with it. I would
exactly
have to agree. Yeah.
Exactly. So I looked at this and it didn't make me popular to question the model, because I was just saying you had a system that produced such a variability in outputs in terms of the quality of leadership. If it was a mechanical system, if it was a piece of equipment, you would not use that equipment. So why were we persisting with it in terms of leadership development? So that started a nearly 40-year search for what does actually work. So what I mean by that is increasing productivity, reducing absenteeism, increasing employee engagement, increasing quality, increasing customer satisfaction, increasing the amount of ideas and innovation, create all of that. And essentially the scientific approach was to try to apply what we knew academically or from so-called best practice, and then create hypotheses saying that if this is correct, this is what we would expect to find, working with real employees in real situations in very large sample sizes over long periods of time.
Can I cut across then, Frank? My understanding then of what you did. So you became pretty senior, fairly senior HR director.
Yeah.
But that gave you the opportunity to look at all of this HR stuff and test it and see what worked and what didn't work.
And across different cultures, different sectors, and in other organizations as well. And then seeing what actually happened.
Yeah.
Just constantly, whatever worked, consolidate it. Then the bits that didn't work, whatever the return on investment in terms of leaders' time was greater than the benefit they got from doing it, then why are we doing it?
Could you give us an example of one of these tests then so people can understand it a little bit better?
For example, very early on, junior manager in a factory. So I was I'd be the person responsible for dealing with the trade unions in an automotive factory in the West Midlands. And I wanted to experiment with the idea behind autonomous teams. But the board was very, very reluctant to give any degree of power to the shop floor.
No autonomy, whatever else you do. Yeah.
Yeah. And now, so we had to start very small. So just started with small items that people use on a shop floor, grease and things like that's just provided by management. And I just did an experiment in one area, and I said to the guys, look, tell me you're frustrated that you have to get sign off to get this and you need it for your job. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you control of your budget. You spend it and see what happened. And what happened was we actually reduced the expenditure on these items because the guys owned using these items in a responsible way. Now, that's only a tiny little experiment very early on. But then we were able to do broader things because you got the confidence of the board to try and do more, you might call, exciting experiments. Later on, as I became more senior, I used to do things like abolish the appraisal scheme and abolish recognition schemes.
So Frank, sorry, just so basically, you spent your whole career essentially researching, testing what ways of leading and developing people get the best results out of your people.
Yes, and this was the process all the time. Test, create a hypothesis, test against it. So predict what you think should happen if the theory is correct. Then see what actually happened, learn from that, consolidate what worked, and then test through hypothesis and testing different approaches.
So you effectively almost went through the sort of CIPD best practice manual and then decided, well, that's all right, people saying it's best practice, but does it work or not?
Yes.
And the stuff that worked, you kept, and the stuff that you couldn't see any evidence for, you
but not just narrowly, and not just looking at CIPD stuff. So not just looking at psychology, but also looking at social anthropology, neuroscience, looking at what we can learn from the arts, what we can learn from medicine, what we can learn from a very broad range of knowledge, if you like. My area, I was an HR director. There's a lot of people who are not very numerate. Give you an example. How many times have you heard people being surveyed about working from home and saying 80% of people working from home saying they're more productive? Well, what did they think people who want to stay working from home would say
What
about
they're
their
going to say.
productivity
Yeah.
when they were asked.
Yeah.
This kind of Mickey Mouse survey stuff is drives me nuts, to be honest.
So we've got, you've got like 40 years worth of testing this wide range of things in this wide range of circumstances of things that really move the dial in terms of performance. And if I put you on the spot and said, like, just talk to us about maybe that you would say that people should be thinking about if they really want to move the dial on their performance and the people's performance around them, what would be the things?
First thing is not to see leadership as a random collection of specialist interventions. You might have someone who specializes on recognition. Now, sometimes they mix it up with reward, and that's not helpful because they're very different, but they specialize in that area. And someone else might specialize in constructive feedback. They differentiate from each other because they get interested in their own specialism. And the trouble is, because of fear of missing out, which in business terms is a fear of the competition getting an edge on us, we devour the stuff coming out of the universities, and it gets leveraged by consultancy firms with the next big thing, the branding of essentially the same body of work. Businesses then implement stuff which has been developed and focused on narrow, whereas what we need in business is broad.
Yeah, but that makes sense though, doesn't it, Frank? Because actually, I mean, if I ask a recognition person, somebody who knows about recognition, about an employee problem, they'll give me a recognition solution.
Yeah.
Whereas if I ask a reward person, assuming they're different, they give me a reward solution. So we tend to see the problems from our own sphere of expertise, but that just narrows things down. That misses a point.
Frank, is leadership as a more holistic concept rather than the individual elements within it as a system.
Particularly using systems thinking and that whole discipline of systems thinking. And see it that way. So that's top end. Then in the specifics, the three, what I call the core skills: recognition, coaching, constructive feedback. Make sure all your leaders are superb at doing that, and don't send them on coaching programs on their own. So don't isolate coaching from recognition and constructive feedback.
So excuse my ignorance, but how would you define coaching versus constructive feedback?
Essentially, coaching should be aimed at your high performers, your employees with the right traits and the right values, who usually get very little coaching because they're doing such a good job. But the return...
Okay. So a lot of the coaching is negative coaching.
Yeah, don't think about coaching as below the red line, remedial stuff. Obviously, you can use coaching, but constructive feedback's much more powerful for that.
Yeah.
I think that's a massively important insight, Frank, and I've come across that once or twice in the past. But I bet you most people listening to this will have focused their efforts and their team's efforts on coaching for a remedial action.
It's one of the major mistakes.
Everyone does it, but actually, as you point out, actually coaching your best performers, I think, does a few things. One, it gives them recognition and it creates that virtuous circle that you were talking about in terms of performance and improvement. I think also the uplift you can get from improving your top performers is much greater than the uplift you can get from improving your bottom performers. And thirdly, I think it also is that people actually like coaching when you get into that sort of environment, when it's a positive thing. And so then people want some of the coaching.
Exactly.
Whereas when it's seen as a remedial thing, it's almost like coaching's a punishment.
Yes.
So nobody wants it,
Well, I used to set expectations on that. So whenever I took over a new team, new department, whatever it was, I'd sit down with my team and I would say to them, look, I was setting expectations as part of that. I'd say one of my objectives is to help you reach the maximum of your potential. And if some of you go higher in this organization hierarchically than me, I will be so proud of that achievement. But remember this, when you come to me and you want an answer and you want direction, and I decide that there's some learning here for you, there's some growth potential, and rather than giving you direction and telling you what to do, I invest some of my limited time in a coaching conversation so that you can figure things out for yourself. And often, by the way, come up with better answers than I would have come up with anyway. Remember that. Remember why I'm doing it. So there is an element of positioning coaching in a very positive way.
Yeah.
As well.
So this is the first thing, which is all about the elements of leadership and seeing them as a system.
Yeah.
What's the second?
Well, the second one is make sure that your skill level is absolutely world class on recognition, coaching, and constructive feedback. That's the core.
And sorry, can you just, for me, just define those three things? What exactly do you mean?
Let's define them by their purpose. The purpose of recognition is not giving people stuff. Okay, that's tangible recognition. And that's what they do in recognition schemes. What I mean by recognition is ensuring that everybody is never taken for granted. Very high bar that. Make sure no one's taken for granted. And that means the quality of the conversations you have with that individual, so that when you do give them recognition, they understand it fully and it lands in the right way. And that, by the way, getting into the technical side is now, that means the emotional content of it is driven higher than usual in businesses. Coaching is developing people to the maximum of their potential. That's what it's for. And constructive feedback is about dealing with things quickly, nipping things out the bud, and correcting them quickly. So I call gap 1, gap 2 problems. A gap 1 problem is a leader that's operating above the minimum requirement, but they've got the potential to be even higher above the minimum requirement. There's a big upside. That's a gap 1 issue. Gap 2 is when somebody's operating below the minimal level. They're very different conversations. And one of the problems why we have such low public sector productivity is the public sector deals with gap 2 problems with gap 1 interventions. The gap 1 intervention, we've got time. The person doesn't have to improve. They're already doing a good job. We're not going to be assertive about that. If they're happy with where they are, we can encourage them, but ultimately they're doing a good job. We can't force the issue. Gap 2, damage is being caused here. If it's a gap 2 problem, you've got to be much more robust. Quick, assertive.
Just getting myself back on track a wee bit. Things I need to worry about. One is look at it systematically.
Yeah.
The second thing is the whole, just how you integrate those three things: recognition, coaching, and constructive feedback.
Which themselves are part of a wider model called the cathedral model. Yeah.
Okay. So then we come on to your cathedral model as a whole. And we'll put this on the website so people can see it. But go on, just talk us through the cathedral model.
Cathedral model was, the origins was I wanted to develop something that overcame the soft shit problem. The soft shit problem is the way people who understand numbers and hard science often regarded the stuff coming out of the HR function or the learning and development function or whatever. So good stuff was thrown out because people couldn't see the science, they couldn't see the numbers, they couldn't see the validity. So one of the ways in which you deal with any new concept, and this was a new concept, was if people are familiar with it in a kind of vague sense. So at the time, do you remember the early House of Quality?
Yeah, I do.
So I wanted something that vaguely looked like the House of Quality, because a lot of that continuous improvement stuff was done that way, and there was a lot of science behind that. So that's why.
So sorry, just to cut across, if people haven't seen the House of Quality, it was almost like the Parthenon or something like that. There were kind of 3 or 4 pillars, and there was a triangle at the top, and there was a base, and it was just this model about how you get a quality organisation. But you effectively took the same approach to.
Yeah, I wanted to reduce. Stuff. If you think about barriers to entry, this is barriers to intellectual understanding, if you like. I wanted to reduce the barriers. In other words, if they were familiar with seeing the value in that kind of diagram, I wanted to describe what we were doing leadership.
So what you're saying, Frank, what you're saying is that people need a model to understand stuff. It makes them feel comfortable and warm.
Well, certainly one of us needs a model.
People do this.
Standing joke. I like a nice model. Right, keep going. So you built this model to help people understand.
And the model, the very first version, just had recognition, coaching, constructive feedback, we'd developed over the years, because I found examples where if you only did the core skills, but you didn't set the expectations, for example, about what coaching is, then the coaching sub-optimized. So you need to be clear on the setting expectations. And interesting, Gallup data consistently on their 12 questions, which question correlates most with very high levels of engagement is, do I know exactly what's expected of me? So being very, very clear about how you set expectations and what they are is crucial. And the reason that's combined with managing overcommitment is when we set expectations is when those conversations are where we often overcommit people.
I've got the joy of having this cathedral model in front of me. So let me just explain it a wee bit to people. So there are effectively 5 pillars. The first one is setting expectations and managing overcommitment. The second one's recognition. The third one is coaching and delegation. The fourth one is constructive feedback. And you've explained how those 3 things sort of loop around each other. But you can't really have that unless you've set the expectations in the first place. So I totally get that. But then you've got a 5th column, which is escalation. Yeah. So what's that one?
Escalation is what you do when everything else hasn't worked, or when something is so bad you have to, if you like, terminate. So your disciplinary procedure, your capability procedure, they're formal escalation process.
Yeah.
But escalation also includes informal escalation, where 2 peers. Now, one peer might escalate in a conversation with another about delivery across functions, for example. So escalation is where you go to when everything to the left has not worked. You still have to make sure that the service is delivered, the quality is delivered, or whatever.
But that's really interesting, right? Because I have worked for organizations who have their version of performance management, and they really, go round and round and that. But when you get to the point where somebody, frankly, it's not cutting it, their escalation process was just woeful. Whereas bizarrely, I would argue the best place I ever worked, they had a really, really robust escalation process. And if your face didn't fit, you were out. But it was used very, very rarely. But when you needed to use it, it was there. And I suppose, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, compare that to the civil service in the UK. The way they deal with escalation is to write very good reviews for the individual and get them a job in another department. And
escalate them up somewhere.
Yeah, it's called informally pass the plonker. So in practical terms, don't forget, some people are underperforming and not capable of performing. So you also have to have a very empathetic and understanding and supportive mechanism for looking for what their strengths are and potentially finding them another job. And when you do that, it's not about being, firing everybody kind of thing. It's about finding the right slot. And the bigger the organization is, the more opportunity you have to play to people's strength. Because otherwise it sounds like it's just kind of just get people out. And in that kind of situation, you're going to lose mavericks. You're going to lose rough diamonds. You're going to lose people who may not have had the same chances of other people.
So coming back to the model then. So I've got setting expectations, recognition, coaching and delegation, constructive feedback, and an escalation process, which is either you're out or we'll find you the right job.
Yes.
But you wouldn't aim to get there. It's not your intention to get there. Yeah. But then underneath that, you've got 2 other layers then. So just talk us through those.
Yeah, well, the foundation is about, bear in mind, we're talking about a model for creating a culture from the bottom up in the organization. The behavioral standards are how a workforce or any group of people in an organization can create their own way of working with each other. So I'll give you a practical example.
Yeah.
So many organizations talk about having a no-blame culture. Okay.
Yeah.
And no-blame culture appears in a lot of value statements on the wall, etc. And in one particular organization, there was a quality issue. The operator would be taken off the line and have to work their way back on. They'd have to prove they weren't the reason for so they were assumed guilty and then had to prove they weren't. So you can imagine what that did to employees' willingness to own up to mistakes, to reveal mistakes early on so they could be fixed. And so when we did a process called rapid mass engagement, which is creating, in this case, a culture from the bottom up, this issue about how we deal with quality went up again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So we then had to resolve it. So the first behavioral standard is, when something goes wrong, we ask, what happened? Why did it happen? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And we don't ask, who did it?
Yeah.
So if you're a manager walking past a quality problem on a line, and the frontline supervisor goes over, and the supervisor goes, "What did you do that for?" Are they in line with the behavioral standard or not?
No.
If the frontline supervisor goes and says, "Look, relax, son. Things happen sometimes in on production lines. It's okay. Let's just see if we can find out what's going on here." That was one of the major changes in that location, which transformed the quality performance of that site.
It's about just being clear what the behaviours are that are acceptable, and the corollary, what's not acceptable. And then, so just coming back to the model, your sort of final layer then is your accountability coaching process.
Yeah, accountability coaching is maintaining a standard once established, and it applies to anything. It doesn't just apply to the skills within the cathedral model. It applies to your quality standards, your financial standards, your health and safety standards, your anything, anywhere where you've got a standard. It's important that the standard is maintained, if you like, enforced. It's not programmatized. It's not made into any paperwork or bureaucracy, but it's a skill.
Yeah, okay.
The show you're listening to right now brings you insights to help you improve performance and enjoyment of work.
It takes a long time to produce, but we think it's well worth it. It's all in the name of helping you getting the job done well.
All we ask in return is that you share the link to this show with someone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, click on follow the show wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
So let me just summarize that model then, Frank. So I've got, along the bottom, I've got, being very clear about behavioral standards and self-awareness, values, things like that. Then I've got your accountability coaching process, which makes sure that everything happens the way it should do.
Yes.
Then I've got 5 key pillars, which are setting expectations and managing over commitment, recognition, coaching and delegating, constructive feedback, and escalation. And then across the top of that, you've got this whole debate about quality and quantity, because there's no point in doing these things unless you do them repeatedly and...
Yeah. Let's put it in context. In corporate life, when I used to have senior guys coming into me and saying, "Frank, I really get the quality of recognition stuff and it's working in my division. Look at the engagement scores. I've got that. I know how all our leaders can give really high quality recognition to not just their staff, but to their colleagues and their bosses and everyone. It goes in all directions and it's fresh and always sincere how to do that. That bit I'm fine with." But they'd say to me, and this happened quite frequently, "I don't understand how you generate the quantity of recognition that I see you giving."
Yeah.
But let's think about this. So let's imagine I give you genuine, sincere recognition. So what happens to you at self-image level?
Oh, my ego balloons.
In particular, your self-image will go up.
Yeah.
As your self-image increases, what happens to your confidence?
That grows as well.
Yeah. As your confidence grows, what happens to your openness or receptivity to any kind of external inputs, such as coaching?
So you become more open.
You become more open, more receptive.
You're less defensive.
If you're more open and receptive for any given input, what happens to the amount you can learn compared to if you weren't open?
Oh, so you can then take much more.
Yeah. Now, as you do that, then go and act. So you now go and either do something that you weren't doing before that's very good, or you do something you were doing before but better. When you do that, what happens to the natural opportunity I have after the coaching to give you recognition because you've just done something you didn't do before that was really good, or you've done something that you were doing before better.
So then that increases as well.
So I have the natural opportunity to give you recognition. So as I give you recognition, what happens to you at self-image level? What happens to you? So what you've got there is the driver of fresh recognition is not in the recognition box. It's the coaching conversation that generates the improvement in the person's performance, which then naturally pulls the recognition, which increases the quantity of recognition. So there's a dynamic system effect between the recognition and the coaching. And the specialists don't notice the dynamic systems interactions that naturally exist in leadership.
Because they're only focused on their own little bit.
Yeah.
That's
why I abolished recognition schemes, because purely focusing on recognition schemes means your root cause identification is invalid. You need to drive up, people need to know how to give recognition, but to get the quantity and to make sure it's fresh, people need to be doing lots of coaching conversations. And then on the back of the coaching conversation, naturally, you don't need a scheme. And so that's why I was able to abolish recognition schemes. By the way, I never told corporate I was abolishing them. There's other things like managing overcommitment. What do we normally do in organizational life? We try and make our employees more resilient. There's nothing wrong with resilience, but that's working on a symptom of the issue. The root cause is the creation of overcommitment. Why do we overcommit our employees, and why do we ourselves overcommit ourselves? That's the root cause. So if you can work on removing the root cause, you don't need to have your workforce being particularly resilient, and therefore, by the way, you can recruit more widely in the job market.
Yeah. So another question for me then, Frank. So that's your model, but you looked at loads of other stuff. What didn't make the cut and why not?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously when I set up on this route, I expected the things I've been taught in leadership development myself in Shell and Unilever I expected to validate it, but I didn't. For example, there's nothing about reward, because although reward matters,
it only matters if you do it badly, would be my observation. Yeah.
And it also has lots of unintended negative consequences. You could look at the 2008 recession caused by partly by rewarding salespeople to sell inappropriate mortgages to people who shouldn't have mortgages.
Yeah, don't talk to Jimmy about that.
Yeah.
It has caused the crisis in the UK single-handedly.
Yeah, you might be overplaying that a little bit, James.
Yeah.
But it also, reward has a very temporary impact as well.
Now, there's some evidence.
It doesn't last.
Yeah, there's some evidence under certain circumstances, certain things. But when I'm talking about on a Pareto basis, so we're talking here about the Pareto break. So what you're doing is you're ranking what's making the biggest impact, second, third, and you're looking for where you get to a point where, for sake of argument, number 7 is much stronger than 8, and therefore if you do 8, you're actually displacing or diluting the power of sticking with the top 7. And so the model is what was above the
okay, so you're not getting into this doesn't work.
No,
what you're saying is I
doesn't work as well.
Yeah. For example, appraisal systems can work in some circumstances. Recognition systems are better than doing nothing about recognition, but they're massively less powerful than doing what I was describing earlier.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is be aware of argument dilution and remember the target audience is busy leaders. So when you get them to do stuff which doesn't add more value than something else, the opportunity cost of doing it, stop doing it. And that's why there's no reward in there. It doesn't mean you don't manage reward. It's just you don't focus on it. There's no appraisal systems in there. There's nothing about resilience, because if you manage...
But there isn't an appraisal system in there, because effectively by doing that recognition, coaching, delegating, construction fee, you're doing that all the time. Yeah. So why would you do it as an annual?
Yeah, you might have, you will have certain expectations for the year, but you won't have a whole bureaucracy around around appraisal and rankings and stuff like that, because you're just going to manage low performance, manage high performance, make sure you don't have perverse incentives. So you do have to manage incentives and manage reward, but it's not something you should focus on. Just manage it.
Yeah. Okay. So not no rewards, but rewards you do what you have to do, but you don't. It's not a strategic play.
It's not in the model.
Yeah. Incentives, not a strategic play for you.
No. Just avoid unintended consequences.
Yeah. Recognition systems, likewise, not a strategic play.
But recognition
appraisals, and then the whole annual appraisal and force distribution and all of that.
Oh God, never do force. Anyone who understands statistics knows you can't apply force distribution to numbers like that, and it causes all the effects that you talked about earlier. The other simple thing is, whoever put reward and recognition together in the same category, I wish you could find who it was and kill them. I don't mean literally. I'm not threatening violence here. I'm just talking about levels of irritation, because they should not be in the same category, because they're fundamentally different from each other.
So if people want to find out more, Frank, where should they look? So you've got a book called
Rapid Mass Engagement, McGraw-Hill.
Which is a good book, although I have to say the book is better than the Audible.
Yeah, don't get the Audible version, guys, because...
Who did the Audible?
Oh, it's got some yank on it. And
I thought you were going to tell me Frank did it himself.
That would have been much better, Jimmy. It's not an anti-American thing. It's an anti-actors reading words they don't understand thing. There's nothing wrong.
It started talking about Unilever. It started doing the heading.
So we can put links to material and links to the book in the podcast description, can't we?
Super. So thank you very much for taking us through that, Frank. All that information will be on the website for anybody who wants it. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers now. We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
from purpose to corporate jargon,
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
if your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com
or james@ajobdonewell.com.